I'm going to a Star Wars wedding on Monday,
Yes.
which
That's
is basically a fancy dress wedding. So
Are you
it's
dressing
going to be
up? What are you
interesting.
dressing up as?
I'm dressing as a stormtrooper because we thought that would
Fantastic.
be an
Yes.
easy one to go as a group.
Yep, no, you've got the
Yeah,
height for a good
fun.
stormtrooper. Fantastic.
Cool, cool. Yeah.
Welcome to Pros and Cons, a podcast by writers for writers, brought to you by Precipice Fiction. Precipice Fiction would like to acknowledge the people of the Eora and Durag nations as the original custodians and storytellers of the land this podcast was created on.
Hello, listeners, and welcome to Pros and Cons, the podcast where we feel like pros and sometimes we feel like cons. I'm your host today. I'm James Healy, and we've got a bit of a special episode today. Instead of getting the team together and discussing a topic, we decided to do a one-on-one interview to get a little bit more background and insight on one of our own team members. And today I'm very fortunate enough to be joined by Ali Burnham. Ali, I'll let you do your own introduction because I'm bound to leave something out.
No problem. Even though I feel like I'll be talking a lot about myself this episode. Hi, I'm Ali Burnham. I primarily write for screenplay, but I've been dabbling in prose, comics that you'll hear all about. I also do a bit of teaching for creative writing, both for school-aged and adults.
Very prolific, very prolific. So I wanted to start off by asking, where did your writing start? What got you into that?
Yeah, I feel like I've got a pretty boring story. But I guess I was just always a creative kid. I did music, I did drama, English were the subjects I gravitated towards. And, shout out to teachers who do their job well. And I think a lot of us might have the same story, but I did have one English teacher once, that one typical memory where they told me, look, you're really good at this. If you keep going, you write good creative stories. So in hindsight, I see the value of that moment, and I hear that story quite a lot. So just a shout out to great, encouraging high school English teachers that do that. So I kept pursuing it in drama class. I ended up always being the one to put my hand up to write the group plays. Because like we could come up with an idea on the floor, but then it's like, well, who's going to go away and type this up? So I was always eagerly volunteering to be that person to type up the plays. Since I've always been a massive pro wrestling fan, I do remember in high school that I wrote Hamlet as pro wrestling. Was one of
Amazing.
the big
Awesome.
shows we did in high school. So yeah,
Cool.
all that, like the poison sword was like a wrestling finisher maneuver that they would hit on someone else. Anyway, yeah, it was rad. All when a character dies, obviously in Hamlet, they've been defeated in the match. Yeah. So clearly I was an early brilliant mind and talent writing something like that in high school. And then out of high school, I went straight into film school at university. The degree I did was bachelor in film and screen media at Griffith University. And this was me being, hey, I love writing, love screenwriting, keen to learn more about it, but maybe I'll fall in love with a different facet of film. Like maybe I want to be a director, maybe I want to be an editor. Like I still wasn't sure. I love the idea of a film degree could show me all of that, and I could find my way. And I
And that
did.
degree was kind of open. It gave you different directions with that,
It
did it?
was it was it was a very practical degree, which looking back, I really did love. It was very hands-on, so I got a lot of ground floor experience learning sound design, being in there, working in Pro Tools, color grading, using different editing software and editing assignments. Like I'm grateful for those skills, but they were some gnarly. Just being told to edit something is yeah, a gnarly assignment. The hours that you would all of us just in the labs in like 3
Were you
a.m.
just given like a random piece of footage that you had to edit, or
As sometimes
putting together
yes.
your own film?
Yeah, and then sometimes it was our own stuff. Some would be like recutting something. So say it would be another short film they had all the rushes for that we had no context for.
Okay.
They would give us all the rushes and they're like, go away and re-edit this film. I think they would let us see the final cut that someone else had done, and they're like, go and do your own creative take on a final cut of this short film. So I did actually quite love the creative part of editing, and I still do a little bit. I'm funny enough, I'm working on a Talking Heads documentary now, just as a part of my Westwards gig. So these tools never leave.
At the band? The band?
No, sorry.
Oh, okay.
Talking Heads is a style of like interviews for the
cool. Okay.
documentary. Oh, if only it was a documentary.
Yeah.
No. It's far less exciting. There's an Australian poet who passed away last year, quite a renowned Australian poet, Robert Adamson. So we've done a series of interviews with like his colleagues and other Australian poets, talking about his work and reading some of his poems. So in theory, all our rushes are quite boring. They're Talking Head style footage, and so it's the creative task of like, well, how can I weave this together to actually create something quite watchable and entertaining, someone that you can watch for an hour. So I do love that. I feel like I learned a lot from the creative part of editing, that even if you're a scriptwriter, you write the script, the story's not done, because then you film it, things are organically going to happen on set, and there's going to be changes, and the story's going to change there. And then the story's told again in editing for the third time, where there's another opportunity to imply new things, change the pacing, just even add new meanings. If you cut from here to here, suddenly something's being implied that never existed in the screenplay. So that taught me a lot about how malleable story is. And I guess I was never a precious screenwriter after that. A lot of directors I knew who were also screenwriters, they were the type of mind who, they wrote the story down and then they wanted to direct it and make it. And they were quite precious about the vision of it, while I was always a bit of a detached screenwriter in that I created the blueprint, and then was very excited to hand it off and see what the other creatives could do with it. I did really embrace this idea that the screenplay would go on to become something else that lived and could be interpreted and changed. Just as long as the blueprint had enough information for the other creatives to jump off and invite them into the story to do their own creative thing. So
that's a fascinating way of thinking about it. Do you think that most screenwriters that they are kind of precious, or they do kind of want to hold on, or did you want it to turn out closer to the way they envisioned?
I feel my biased answer is I feel like the good ones aren't precious. Maybe I don't know. Maybe there's the few director, writer, auteurs that are great, but there's not many. I feel like that's a tricky career path, or a career path you arrive at right at the end once you've mastered both art forms. But for the average film school kid who's like, no, I'm a writer director, like that's a tough path. You kind of want to think of them as two very separate skills you want to master. And I feel like an important part of the screenplay mastery is you're just creating a jumping off point you need to be able to invite actors in. You can't tell them what to do. You need to be able to invite the cameraman, the DOP in. You can't tell them what to do. You can only imply things, and they love it when you imply things. Because say in a screenplay, you don't actually say shot choices. You don't say, here's a close-up, here's a wide, but just in the way you write it, either if you're giving fine detail on a certain object, obviously you're implying that's a close-up. So then the director and the DOP feel like geniuses when they choose to make that a close-up, and you're like, yeah, well done. So there's ways to imply without actually telling them, and that's it's very collaborative, and I really enjoyed that part of it. So yeah, no, I guess my film school journey ended with me learning all these different parts of we even got to play with 16mm film and everything, learning to thread the cameras and shooting on that. That was what we got to play with Aries for our final. I did end up directing in film school. Our very third year final, they had like this whole pitching contest, so only like 14 short films would be made out of the entire cohort, and the script I pitched did get up. It was a sci-fi, obviously, an early sign of what I was writing. And I did direct it because I'm like, well, I'm never going to have the opportunity to really find out if I like directing. And I guess I did enjoy it, but I got to the other end being like, cool, I've done that. I never have to do that again. Never again. It was just very exhausting directing. It was just the people management side of things really exhausted me. I loved the creative side of it, but I managed to get to the end of the whole pipeline being like, look, I still like writing the most. That was an excellent 3 years of skilling up around film, making all these contacts in film, but still being like, okay, I think this screenwriting is the craft I want to chase and pursue.
That's brilliant. Yeah, like you'd found your place from trying other things, which is good. Yeah, that's very cool.
Yeah.
My next question, kind of following on from that, is what then led you into prose, and from then into
so I pursued screenplay, so I ended up then applying for my master's of writing for performance at NIDA. So as a writing for performance degree, that was either for plays or film. So I applied as someone writing screenplays. Brilliant year at NIDA, and then I was freelancing after that. But as early foreshadowed, I write a lot of genre, kind of science fiction and fantasy, and just I guess all my ideas were big budget as a screenwriter, unfortunately. is the simplest way to say it. I'm doing a lot of work for other people at this time, which is great. So I can write their ideas that are low budget, and these are things that can actually be made and go out into the world. But all the stories that I'm really like personally passionate about, they would require a budget that Australia would never have. And especially not on like an emerging writer in their 20s would write. So it was just a very realistic, practical decision to be like, cool, I'm a screenwriter. I'm writing things like nice packaging on sound on my first feature credits. But I'm like, what am I going to do with my spy movie? What am I going to do with this fantasy idea I have? And so I'm like, maybe I need to learn to write a fucking book, was the idea, essentially. Because I'm like, I'm still passionate about these ideas, but they'll never be screenplays. That's just not, maybe one day, but that's not how the industry works. So it was quite scary, the idea of wanting to dive into prose. Because I had spent at this point 6-7 years knowing how much energy and work goes into a 90-page document, and then I'm like, writers, they're writing 300-page documents. I'm like, that's just a whole nother level. Like, I really respected the how scary the climb was, the challenge would be. I have a very healthy appreciation for 90 pages. 300 pages was terrifying. So I went to a course at Writing New South Wales called Year of the Novel, run by Emily Maguire, and she did a great job. She just, from the ground level, held our hands through just the basics, and I really got a sense of where my gaps were in storytelling, and I'm still very hyper aware of them. So when I say gaps, I think I've mentioned them before, but in a screenplay, you intentionally don't write emotions on the page, because again, that's telling an actor how to do their job. So you have to imply, they do a movement, or they just do something, and leaving the gaps is the wonderful creative exercise for the actor to work it out. And actors are very attuned to that game of working it out. That's their whole skill set. So I would write a piece of prose, a dramatized scene where the characters, only doing movements and only saying things. And a lot of my initial feedback is they're not feeling anything. Why aren't you putting the emotions and thoughts on the page? And I'm like, I see. Okay. This is an important promise of what a book is compared to a screenplay. So basically that's a lot of where my leveling up had to happen, was, even all this stuff would happen in my head, it was not encouraged to put it on the page before, but now I yes, had to purposely almost rewire my brain, train myself to put that stuff on the page. And even now, after 2019, 5 years I've been dabbling in prose now. It's still a weakness. I'm a lot better at it now, and even knowing it's a weakness, but I'll still hand in a first draft, and the first round will be, this section is great. You've done it all here, but you've forgotten to do it here. You need a bit more of emotions and thoughts here. And I'm very used to that note, but it is good when people point it out to me, because I don't organically see it, just because of the way screenwriting wired me early on.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, and I do think that that's something that a lot of writers do as well. You can see when people hand stuff in for editing, sometimes they'll have I guess people like, they take it from TV, which is that they'll see a reaction on TV and then they'll write it in, and they're kind of being subtle sometimes, but they kind of almost televise in their writing and stuff.
Yes.
So is it that kind of thing, or is it more like just like you're setting up the cue as if there was an actor?
Yes, no, I had one note on, it was my Majesty's script, I think, where I had written it so there was a series of reaction shots, as you said. So something was revealed, and then I'm like, this character did this character did this, the character did this, and the editor's like, why are you, what? They're like, just stay with the main character, just stay with them and fully flesh out how they're reacting. Why have you pulled the focus away to these other characters? And I'm like, because if it was filmed, that's what would happen. You would cut to that person. And I'm like, but I've fundamentally disrupted the flow and pacing and tension of being invested in the main character by drawing focus to everyone else. So yeah, no, it was absolutely at that point, I'm still like, oh, this person reacted. And that was the exciting thing, giving all the actors, because it would be rude to ignore the other actors in the scene. You've always got to be giving them clues on what they're doing. But in a book, at that time, the audience didn't care what the other characters were doing. We can find out later how they reacted. At the moment, at that time, it was that we should have stayed with the protagonist. So learning all those small lessons, that's the stuff they don't teach you in classes. It's only stuff I've learned through trial and error, through having a crack at it, and then hearing from readers and editors that they're missing something. And I phrase it to myself as the promise of the book, as in it's the promise of the medium. The readers are expecting different things, and I always need to remind myself that the promise of a book is they always want to be feeling what the main character is feeling. Really, they always want to. It's almost like an emotion ASMR simulator.
Yes. The
book needs to be. They always need to be tethered to that emotion. So when I'm straying too much into film world and I'm writing a blueprint, I'm like, I've got to make sure that through line is there. Like in a screenplay, intellectually the through line's always there, but I guess I'm relying on the actor will always be embodying that emotion, and I can focus on other things. But you can't get away with that in a book.
Yeah, that's very interesting. You've also done some graphic novels as well, isn't that right?
Yes. So one of the projects, so it started to get out there that I liked genre and worked on genre. So the producers who did Nice Package, so I worked for them.
What does that mean? Did you work on genre? Or does that mean
so that's a phrase, just as opposed to writing contemporary everyday drama, cheap and easy to shoot. I when I say genre, I'm talking thrillers, horrors, sci-fi, fantasy. So those kind of if it's not everyday settings, a set or CGI you probably have to build is genre. So Nice Package is a comedy heist story. So yeah, we could just shoot that one running around the streets of Sydney kind of thing. So those same producers, just talking to them, I told them that, I'm a fan of genre, I'm a fan of sci-fi, fantasy. That's what I would as a dream, love to work in, but I know it's a fairly unattainable dream in film. And then so Dan MacArthur, a few years later, he always had some pretty big and wacky ideas. I love telling this story because it's so insane. But I did get this phone call one day. And he goes, all right, I've had another idea. And I'm like, okay, I'm ready, Dan. And he goes, okay, there's a train, like a tram that you see in Melbourne. I'm like, yeah, go on. And it goes around and it kills people. And I'm like, okay, you're going to need to give me a bit more information. Go on. Turns out that's all he had. That was the pitch. I'm like, okay, right. So that's what I was tasked with fleshing out, creating a world where that pitch made sense. Where there's a train that goes around and it kills people. So off the back of that pitch, Metropius was born.
Oh, I love that. Amazing. Okay.
Just all the world building and everything, and trying to look where we can have a world where it makes sense that we have a police state and a machine that could sensibly go around and kill people, and that's rad rather than being like the wildest pitch you've ever heard. So yes, Metropius was born, and I think it's gone through a few different phases. They're very reactive to the market, which is sensible as filmmakers. So they have been trying to latch on to feature films easier to fund at this point. So into like they're talking to distributors, and then they talk to streamers, being like, oh, are streamers currently taking risks on series at the moment? So they're constantly having those conversations, just willing to strike wherever the money is so it can get made. As a result, for me in the writer's chair, that means I've developed Bibles and pitches for the film version and the series version. So they have both of these to pitch ready to go when they need them. At some point, there was talk of it being live action, then it's been animation, all of that because it's been quite reactive to the market to get this idea out there. So it was this just, I keep thinking boiler pot, cooking pot. Can't remember what the metaphor is. Pressure cooker is what I'm trying to say. A pressure cooker of learning to switch between different mediums. Like it's the one idea, but then how to flip it so it suits a different medium and fulfills that medium best, because we're pitching it to people who know what they're talking about. So there was something about treating the idea as quite malleable and like, yeah, reshaping it to different formats that I did a lot of quite rapidly over a series of, we're like 10 years deep into a Metropius at this point, but yeah, the kind of that first 5 years of doing that. So where eventually that ended up, there was the short animated film was made and done. So I wrote that, and that script was what won me the Augie for that short film. So that was pretty cool. And likewise, comics came out of it as well. Again, from a very producer mindset of audience building. So a lot of the feedback they were getting from producers was, this is a cool idea. It's risky, though. We usually only take these risks on something that have a pre-existing audience. So that's how you get things like Arcane, because it's based on League of Legends, it has a pre-existing audience. They can take a risk on something with that kind of budget in that genre. So part of their audience building strategy is branching out into games and comics. And so they're like, Ali, can you write comics? And I'm like, can I write comics? Ali goes away and learns how to write a comic. But again, because it's the same idea, the same concept I've been working with for so long, it's just a matter of taking that, all the fully fleshed out characters and world, and then it's the format I'm learning and just reshaping the story to the promise of the medium. So I had been through that process before of going from film to books, that I learned to rewire my brain, that I'm like, oh, fundamentally this needs to change because the reader has different expectations of this medium. I just had to do that process again, say with comics, being like, all right, how does the comic medium translate this story? Well, transliterate's probably the better word. Transliterate this story to the audience, the reader, their reader expectations and how they absorb the story. And and so I just different parts of the story get highlighted because of that, or just the way of telling it. So the comic, bit of a slow pipeline with that one. It would have been 2022. The first one came out, and then our amazing illustrator, we still love him, but he moved to the Nordics somewhere. He's in Sweden or Switzerland or somewhere.
Oh, okay. Wow.
So
it's quite a change.
yeah.
Yeah.
He left. He's on the other side of the world. And I think they tried to make it work, but they just,
Yes.
the collaboration didn't survive the long distance. So that we've found a new artist. I say we, I'm very loose. They just inform me of the updates and I go, that sounds rad. Because I've already written all 4 comics at this point. All the comics are written.
Okay.
So for me, the process is done. But now it's in the pipeline where it's with the artist. So they found a new artist for number 2. I've seen the sides for 2. It looks really rad. The style is still a homage to the first artist, but you can tell they've still been able to have their own little flair, which is really cool. So I'm pretty sure issue 2 is going to be coming out this year as well, which is exciting. So I'll be able to be loud about, hey, issue 2 to this story is coming out. So then we'll be halfway through the story. And the point is then once all 4 issues are out, they'll release it as a graphic novel sized volume. So it's just coming out in the paper comic sized issues now. There'll be 4 of those, and then there'll be a full comic, a graphic novel, which will be really cool. It'll be nice to have the full story and completion, especially because I'm so far removed from it that I'm keen to just read it as a reader and remember what happened because it was several years ago now.
That's trippy. Yeah, that'd be crazy. And you've also done games as well, is that correct? You've done some writing for games?
Yes, and by games, talking about the physical tabletop and card games. Oh, if only I'd be able to write for video games. One day, maybe. But
I could see a Metropius video game.
Right? No, don't joke about it. They've talked about it. But turns out video games are really expensive. Yes, in the same pipeline or the same idea, I guess, of expanding into comics, they wanted to expand into games as well. So they've been working with a few game specific contractors, like they build games. That's what these companies do. And then I guess I've come on board as a consultant working with these, again, this wonderful collaborative process. So they're the main drivers of it because they know what they're doing. They understand the mechanics of how to build a board game. And I get to be just the expert on the world in the room. Just to help them with language or just little things like, we don't have a name for the currency yet. And I'm like, all right, let's come up with a name for the currency and just really cool things like that. The board game was actually fairly easy because I have a fairly comprehensive world Bible and they just built everything from the world Bible. That was the document they were building from. The card game's been a little bit more fun. Because I've been upskilling in the past couple of years. I've been learning to play Magic the Gathering, but I'm like, I've been doing it as with my hat on, being like, I'll learn how to play Magic the Gathering, so I understand the intricacies of how an excellent card game works. Mainly from a narrative point of view, how every card in a release can tell the story of a character in a setting surprisingly well. And the only tools you have are the art, the mechanics of the card, and then the flavor text. If those kind of the 3 things you get to play with to imply what this character does, how it interacts with the world around it, whether it fucks things up or it gets fucked. It's actually like quite an interesting storytelling device. So thinking about how to replicate that for a Metropius world, and how we can have key characters as cards, but then also the world and setting explored in different items. And that's just kind of exploded my brain. I'm like, this is just such a fun way to tell a story. It's very subtle. It's very interactive. It's the player has to bring a lot to it, which I like a screenplay, because you have to read the gaps. you're like, oh, when that character interacts with that environment, this mechanic happens. So you're like, well, what does that imply? You're like, okay, clearly that's a character that when they're I'm just making something up, but when they're exposed to water, then they get really strong. And then you're like, okay, yeah, well, that's so does this other character. So are they related? And anyway, so you can just read into the gaps and form the story like that. So yeah, I've been having a lot of fun learning to think like that. And I don't know, there's potential that things have been put on pause for the card game at the moment. The board game, I got an email as recent as last week that the board game will be moving into the next stage. Who knows? Again, I feel very removed from the process. I just get updates. But yeah, slow but steady. It'll be exciting if these things come out into the world. But for me, in the meantime, I just get to play and create.
Yeah, that's cool. Board games, card games, screenplays, graphic novels, writing, like that's so much. Can I ask about those transitions? Were they more down to being inspired by wanting to explore those mediums, or based on opportunities, or based on there being stories that you wanted to tell that didn't really suit the medium that you were currently working in?
Yeah, the unsatisfying answer is it was probably all three. I've observed from myself I have a habit of jumping quite radically, and so just from genre. So I feel like I always wanted to have a crack at every genre. Um, so maybe one day I'll write a crime something, and then I want to jump over to sci-fi. Then I want to write a very literary drama. Like it's just there's something innate in me that wants to jump between all the different genres and play. I'll always, if I'm coming off the back of one, I want to knee jerk and go into another one. So I think I've just had to make peace with that. That's just what I want to do. That's where I'm creatively satisfied, against all rational advice from, branding yourself as a writer and getting your work out there. People are like, no one will know what to hire you for. And I just kind of had to be like, they'll hire me because they think I'm good. I'll just write what I want. I can't recommend that as a sensible career strategy, but at the same time, I don't have the strength to stop myself. So yes, there is
You're having
this
fun, so I think that's a big thing.
So there's a designer's jump genre, and I think a part of that is also wanting to explore different mediums. So Neil Gaiman, I've always loved Neil Gaiman's work, and he's an excellent example to me as a writer who has done that seamlessly. You think of Neil Gaiman, you think of his graphic novels, you think of his books, and now later in his career, he's proven himself incredibly adept at screenplay as well. He's just, it doesn't matter what he's writing, you can still tell that it's a Neil Gaiman property, and it's the quality is the promise of everything he does. And I'm like, if Neil Gaiman could get away with it, I could get away with it. She says incredibly confidently. But and so I love that. I love the fun of playing with it. And I guess it is just that natural urge to explore and learn. And play in the new. Like it's even without Metropius as the opportunity to have tried comics and games, I feel like I would have found the excuse for myself to do it at some other point anyway. It felt inevitable that I would have played in comics. It just so happened that Metropius was the vehicle to try it for the first time. In terms of, do I think I'm using the medium because the story demanded it? I definitely think that way. If I'm deciding an idea is a screenplay or a book now, I'll ask that. And it's a fun process. I kind of have the seed of an idea and I can be like, oh, where are its strengths? And I'm like, is this a screenplay? Is it a book? And I do that juggling and say there's an idea that could work for both. Like there's one kind of, I don't know when I'll get to it, but there's a mother-daughter road movie. I'm calling it a road movie. Road movie story I want to write that could quite easily be a book or a screenplay. So that's one I could sit with and be like, all right. But I call it a movie, but I might actually end up writing it as a book first, I think.
Yeah, that's brilliant that you can tease the ideas out that way and really kind of let them become their own thing, knowing
Yeah,
that you can go right away with
yes,
that. Yeah.
because they will be quite different. And I think Metropius was a great learning pressure cooker again, now that I've got the right metaphor for that, because it's always the same world, it's always the same concept, but it's like, all right, now imagine it as this, now imagine it as this. So playing with that with a different idea, and then I can be like, all right, well, this will actually service it best. I've done that with there's a spy movie, so written as a screenplay in my bottom drawer it's one I've kept coming back to almost every year. So when I do that naturally, I'm like, all right, maybe there's something here. It because I want to keep coming back to it, I won't abandon it. So I'm like, one day I have to do something with this spy movie because it won't leave me alone. And it's one of the few ones where I'm like, well, I think this could work as a graphic novel. So I'm like, if I never get it up as a film, I feel like that's where it would belong. I wouldn't write it as a book. I've already kind of assessed it, and I'm like, no, this spy movie isn't a book, but could be a graphic novel as an alternate way of getting it out there. So
as you lean one way or the other, what for you are the appeals of if you were to turn something into a screenplay or into a
yeah, so for example, that one, there's a lot of like a cat and mouse game between, I guess, the hero and the villain, and the whole story hinges on who has what information when, who, like, obviously very, very spy, linked into the spy tropes of does that character have the one up on them, when did they get that information? And as an audience, you're constantly following along being like, oh, what do they know, what's the reveal that they knew that at that point. So that's the whole plot driver. To write that as a book, as I've learned, the only way to write it, it would have to be quite distant. It would have to be an omniscient voice, because I can't necessarily be inside the characters' heads. Because the moment I'm inside their heads, I have to tell the reader how much information they know. It would be a faux pas to have hidden information from the reader while being inside their head, which is why the Da Vinci Code is a piece of shit.
Thank you.
Yeah, because it pulls that really cheap trick of having a POV character. You're inside their head, but you've purposely not given the reader the full context of what they know. So the only way I write it as a book would be omniscient, so it's not in either character's head. And just I've never written omniscient. I've only ever written kind of inside a head. That's just the style of prose I gravitate towards. So omniscient doesn't, one, interest me, and two, scares me. So there's already two barriers. But then there's just something about it. I can already see what it would look like as a graphic novel. It's just the setting, and that excites me. The moment I can already imagine it, I want to chase that lead. And I feel like comics are really good for that, because it's a puzzle. Comics almost innately are a puzzle, because you have the image, and then you have the text, and then you're like, between A and B, what's the information I'm getting in between? Like, what's the juxtaposition that's been implied? And you puzzle it out as you read across the page. And it's just this very fun, there's this interaction with a comic that you don't necessarily get with prose that I really love. So I think that as a medium device speaks to the genre. So it's the same reason why Metropius comics, they're a noir detective story. Because for me, that's just how comics feel, that as you're reading it, you're puzzling it out. Yeah, there's literally a mystery to be solved. So because this spy movie is also, you're puzzling stuff out, and not necessarily, there's not a mystery to be solved, but you are always constantly wondering what this character's going to do next. I feel like it's a natural energy and driver to the page turning that a comic would have. I don't know if that makes sense. That makes sense in my head, why I believe it's a comic rather than a book. But it's, if not a movie, I'd definitely chase it as a graphic novel.
Cool. And then can I ask, is there or what do you think have been the benefits for you in writing across different mediums, or is there something that you've learned through one medium that has fed back and helped you in another medium, or have they
Yeah,
all been kind of separate ways?
yeah, no, this idea of being able to spot my own weaknesses, definitely with the initial screenplay prose writing, has been incredibly beneficial to both. Um, right now I'm drafting a screenplay, and every screenplay I've written since writing more prose has become more lyrical, and I'm bending the rules a little bit, and I am throwing in more things I normally wouldn't have. So I think pros are informing my screenplay a little bit. I did have one editor, I ended up ignoring him, but he's like, why have you spent all this time describing the pipes on the wall? He's like, just say there's pipes on the wall and move on. And initially I would have like agreed with him as a screenplay, like, why are you fucking about? Because the economy of words is so important that you can't fuck about describing pipes on a wall and water dripping and stuff. But I am doing more and more of that, and I'm kind of just allowing that to now, quote unquote, be my style in screenplay now. Like, as long as it doesn't mess with pacing and doesn't mess with my word count, why not do it? Is
Yeah.
my current thinking. So that's how pros have influenced my screenwriting. And then, yes, obviously, naturally, my prose, I have this wonderful, well-meaning well wishes. It would have been end of last year, but I stood up, and at Westwods we have these Academy Alive nights, which are like open mic nights where I invite people in to read excerpts of their prose. And at the last one I decided to get up and do some Cypress, and I had Nathan with me so he could do the character voices, and I just read
Love that. Brilliant.
the prose. So we just read a section of that, and afterwards everyone came up to me and they're like, wow, no, it read like a screenplay. And they're delivering this as a compliment, but I'm just like, oh, that's a knife to my heart. I'm like, the years I've spent making sure this doesn't read like a screenplay, and you're telling me it reads like a screenplay. I'm like, that's awful. I wanted to read like a book. I'm trying to write a book. So I think I'll never be able to escape my prose feeling quite dramatized and feeling like a screenplay, no matter how much I try. I feel like it's just always going to be there, and I just have to accept that. But I just have to make sure there's enough thoughts and feelings and literary stuff going on that it feels like a book and not a screenplay. So I find it very funny when people, especially since it seems almost in vogue now that we want our books to feel more like screenplays. And I'm almost on the opposite end of that. I'm like, no, enjoy a book for a book. Let a book do the things a screenplay can't. Have fun in those parts of it. Because I'm like, we have screenplays if we want to write a screenplay.
There's no shortage of just no shortage of TV shows and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That's cool. So then, I guess I wanted to ask, what lessons have you learned from what you're currently working on?
Yeah, what I'm currently working on. So there's two main ones. I'll focus on the yellow wallpaper first, just because the yellow wallpaper's been kicking my ass. So which has been a new. It's been a while since I've struggled with a project as much as I'm struggling with this one. So for context, I'm on to draft 6, 3 years with this one project, this screenplay project. And each draft has been rather simple. I have a fairly good rinse and repeat process at this point, where I receive notes. I write the notes in my own words so I can take the emotion out of it. So I'm not like blaming someone else for giving me a bad note. I write all the notes in my own words. So then when I'm actually working on the document, I'm looking at something Ali's telling Ali to do. And that's a pretty good solve. I recommend that. And so I do that, and then I apply the notes. Something I picked up at NIDA for screenplays is I always rewrite the whole document. So I don't do that for prose because that would be insane. What a good way to kill yourself. But with screenplays, there's not that many words. So I have the old screenplay PDF on one screen. On the other screen, I'm writing the screenplay fresh, start to finish. And then, making the changes to the notes. So that's what I do every screenplay redraft. And then Yep, done. Send it back to the producers. At some point, I do my palm card thing as well. That's usually, I forgot to mention the palm cards. That's really important. So after the notes, then I do physical palm cards out on the floor, and I've got that. And that just helps me keep on track as when I'm doing the right, I can
And that is sort of like beats of that's like a beat palm cards.
It's a pacing thing. So say if I have a note that's like, oh, every time I mention this, I need to bring forth this more or focus more on that, or in this scene remove that, by adding them as palm cards, and then I can put the palm card on top of that scene that I've written. I know every time I need to touch it. Like it's just a really, for example, the yellow wallpaper, there's a few threads of the main character's relationship with literally the figure in the wall. And then there's the plot she's having with Jenny, and the baby is kind of one thread. And then the husband. So we've got 3 threads. And because it's a screenplay, I need to be quite aware of when these visual beats are shown, pacing wise. So palm carding it out just helps me go, the silhouette in the wall is seen here, all right, 4 times before we get to the fun and games, or the next section of the screenplay. So it's just a very good visual mapping that helps me. So I always do that. So receive the notes, do the palm cards, and then I can rewrite it. So this has always worked fairly well for me. No issues. I've had a lot of trouble. I've been rewriting draft 6. I started mid-February. It's now April. That's quite long for me to be working on a redraft. And this is me touching it a little bit every day. I do work full time, but my morning times are my writing times. So it's just been exceptionally slow. Because it's exceptionally slow, I'm like punishing myself, being like, what's wrong? Why is it so slow? Why are we still working on this? And I just wasn't thinking creatively about it. It was very just bricks and mortar, like lay down some cement, put a brick on, lay down some cement. But there was nothing, I wasn't doing the creative problem solving. I was just doing the nuts and bolts of rewriting it. So it wasn't very enjoyable. And I thought I was doing the sensible thing of, I want to get this done quickly. So I'm going to stop working on all my other projects. I'm just going to make this my main focus. In theory, that sounds like a sensible thing to do. But I think it has been to my detriment. What I used to do when I was a freelancer was I usually always had 2 projects on the boil. And if there was one that was bothering me, there was always one I really enjoyed. So I could be like, work on the one you hate in the morning, and then do the fun one as a reward in the afternoon. And that flip-flopping between different projects. A lot of people are like, that's insane. How are you working on 2 things at once? And I'm like, oh, I don't know, it works well. So I've come to learn quite recently, we're talking about like the past week, that I probably need that distraction from my brain I need to jump. Either I've gotten used to jumping between projects to be able to motivate myself, but I actually think it was the cocooning of just working on this one project, just siloing it, that was really actually harming my creativity, and I wasn't liking it. So something I had told myself, that I'm like, once I'm on the other side of yellow wallpaper, I'll dive back into Cypress. That can be a reward for finishing yellow wallpaper. Do Cypress. And that wasn't working. That wasn't a big enough carrot, apparently. So I've just gone, fuck it. I'm going to start working on the Cypress draft in the past week or so, just because I want to. And then suddenly it's just been this rush of creativity in the past week. I've been, problem solving, excited, working on the next draft of Cypress, and at the same time I'm still working on yellow wallpaper, and now yellow wallpaper is coming so much easier because it's almost like it's turned the creativity back on for me. Like a metaphor for it would be like, this fire was dwindling and dying, so I went over here and started a new fire, and then I can take logs off that fire and put it back on that one. It's just, while I'm solving Cypress problems over here, my brain goes, oh, while I was at it, here's a yellow wallpaper idea. And I'm like, nice, I'll take it. Thank you. So I'm now doing both at the same time. That sounds insane, but it's actually been really rewarding and has solved, I don't know, whatever jam I was having with yellow wallpaper. It's now moving again. So in terms of a raw practice, like writing as practice advice, I don't know if that'll work for everyone, but I found that that was a solve and something I've learned quite recently about myself. So I did want to share that if anyone is struggling on a project. Never underestimate the benefits of distracting yourself with something else.
That's cool. That's very interesting. Yeah, because like you're saying, a lot of people, they need to just work on the one to like keep going through it. But yeah, that's fascinating. There really is just no one way to skin a cat when it comes to the creative process. Like,
it's almost just years of working out how your particular brain works, and I'm still working out how mine works. Apparently, it's just trying different things when there's different blockages and problems. And yeah, and I guess even that language of me calling it my brain, that separation is helpful. Being like, well, it's not me that's shit at writing yellow wallpaper. My brain just hasn't shown up this time, so I need to work out what I can do to, train it and solve it. Yeah.
Okay, so I guess just to finish up, what's coming up next? What are the next thing we can expect to see from you?
Yeah, well, definitely, hopefully, issue 2 of the Metropius comic. If that comes out this year, woohoo, that's great. I genuinely don't know, but I keep hearing my producers are like, soon, and I'm like, I love soon. And then I guess this is kind of exciting, but quite recently it looks like the pipeline for Cypress, or AKA what book 1 will be called, The Swallow, has kind of solidified, that there is a pipeline to get it out into the world. I don't want to talk about it in too certain terms. One, because I'm terrified of jinxing it. But it looks like this is, if I can get this draft done and handed in, there's a good chance that it can move towards publication in one form or another. So I've been quietly like just sitting with that, good vibes the past week or so that I've been chatting about it. There's been talks. So that would be very exciting. It may not be this year, but it could be an early next year. Who knows? Again, not to jinx it, but wouldn't it be very exciting if, The Swallow is only one draft away from actually being a real book?
Absolutely. Very cool.
So yeah, that would be my next big thing out there, because yellow wallpaper is still a draft. And then so what best case scenario timeline for yellow wallpaper is, I get this draft in, they shop it around for some development funding, maybe there's another draft, then they take it around to a few like market festivals. I know they wanted to go to a few international ones to just try and secure some distribution funding, and the fastest possible timeline on that is like shooting end of next year. So that's just the speed at which filmmaking will work. So that would be very exciting if that comes about. But I've got to write the damn thing first. So it's still palm cards on my floor. So no point counting that chicken before it hatches. But in a perfect world, yellow wallpaper is my next film, and The Swallow is a book that manages to exist.
Cool. Very, very cool. And is there anything kind of bubbling up, anything that you're starting to work on, or anything that's kind of pushing forward, trying to make itself known?
Oh gosh. Well, I am aware that Precipice Fiction, we are thinking about our next anthology. And despite me telling my brain not to, I think I already have an idea for what the short story I would write would be. That one was quite aggressive, actually. That was one of those moments where I'm trying to go to sleep and my brain went, would you like a fully formed short story idea? And I'm like, no, I'm trying to sleep. And we haven't decided on a theme for that one yet. So I really don't want it. My brain's like, but what if it's really cool? What if this happens? So then I had to like sit there and write it on my phone. So I've got this whole outline on my phone. So that'll probably be the next thing I write. That would be very exciting. Because I feel like I've already fucking written it. But I've got the outline for it. Despite not wanting it. so that'll be very
pushing
fun.
ahead now in the brainstorming to come.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
So that would be very cool. I am genuinely excited about Precipice Anthology 2, because now that we know what we're doing, I think we can do it quite quickly, and there's no underestimating that 2 years later we're all probably quite different writers. Because that always surprises me when I start a new project, where I'm like, I've actually been like quietly skilling up since the last time I started a brand new project. So it's that is an exciting thought, that we were already 6 great writers, and now we get to be 6 magnificent writers coming into our next anthology.
Absolutely, yeah. All right, Ali, well, thank you very much for taking the time to like chat through all of that with us.
Thanks
very
so
much, listeners,
for prodding me with your wonderful questions, James. And yes, promising our listeners that it's not just a me fest. We will do one-on-one chats with all 6 of us, the deep dive into each precipice.
Yes, pull the lid off and get to know each other. All right, listeners, thanks very much. This has been Pros and Cons. Thanks for listening.
See you next week.
See you next week.
You're listening to Pros and Cons, the Precipice Fiction podcast.